Hey, welcome back to Instant Value Handicapping, the video series. We are very pleased today to have as our guest Julian Brown. Julian has been a lifelong handicapper, a horse owner. He has his own Facebook page, the Handicapper's Insight, and I highly recommend it. I came across it a few months ago. It's got fantastic insight into handicapping, not just quick angles, but you really get a sense of generosity and camaraderie there, and some deep looks into various aspects of playing the horses. And so, Julian, thank you very much for joining us today.
No, thanks for having me, and thanks for your input on the group. You got a lot of great material yourself, and I really enjoy your approach to the game.
Yeah, well, you make it a very inviting site, and it's a pleasure to be on there and participating. So again, that's the Handicapper's Insight on Facebook. It's Julian's Facebook page. And today I'd like to talk to Julian about jockeys, because he's made some interesting comments. And usually when you talk to horse players about jockeys, it's usually you get back a complaint about bad rides, or a lot of casual players just kind of idolize leading riders. But Julian goes a lot deeper into it. And so I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you became such a astute evaluator of riders. Was it through your horse ownership or through your handicapping pursuits?
Well, I think when you start playing the game, you probably overvalue the jockey factor, because it's something that's easy to latch on to, and you look for the big name. But after a while, I think most horse players just kind of accept a certain level of jockey, and then you're going to get some good and bad rides, and that's kind of a occupational hazard. I think we also accept the best riders are going to get bet more, and so we just don't obsess about it. And also, when a horse wins, you don't know why a horse wins. It could be first-time lacings. It could be blinkers. It could be the jockey. There's so many reasons to go in. So you really never know what the effect of a jockey is on a horse. It's very difficult. So about 20 years ago, I got interested in a website called Turf Day, turfday.com. I learned about it through Barry Meadows Monthly that I used to. I wrote some for Barry, but he interviewed me, but he had great information about the industry. And turfday.com had great sire information, great information about trainers, jockeys, everything. It was an unbelievable site. All the information was indexed, like on the when the card was there. Every horse would have its pedigree information, trainer information, jockey information. Unbelievable. Wow. So the good thing about its ratings were the ratings weren't based on return on investment. See, generally what we do is we want to have high percentages, but we also know about high percentages is if the horses are all 4 to 5, maybe the best jockey or the best trainers are just getting the best stock, and it's got nothing to do with what they're doing. So then we look for a return on investment, because at least if you bet 100 of a certain angle, certain trainer, certain jockey, is it a profitable move? That'll give us some indication that there's something more to that trainer or jockey than just than it's just winning on the best stock. So, but the problem with return on investment is if, let's say, for example, a jockey has 100 mounts and he wins 10% of those 100 mounts, and you're losing money on the dollar for those winners. Well, when you add it up to get the return on investment, you just really consider the 10 races that he won, and you took all the returns and divided it by 10. That's how you have the ROI. The other 90 races, all you know about those 90 races is that they didn't win. You're really taking no data from those other races. So he may finish second 18 times at 20 to 1 on those horses, but the ROI is not going to have any kind of indication that happened. So, but ROI over 1,000 races or so, then you're getting somewhere, because those things kind of even out. Maybe the 10 winners that he had, maybe he won by a nose and he really wasn't that good. And then the 90 losers that he had, maybe over time they balance out. Problem with that is a lot of things that you want to bet are short term. A jockey might be great, but after 1,000 races, maybe maybe he's in a slump, maybe he's not riding well, maybe he doesn't do well at certain tracks. So if you by making yourself have such a large sample, you might not be taking advantage of really important data. So what Turf Day did, Turf Day would also take into consideration high finishes at large prices. So if a jockey, a trainer, if a sire was bringing in long shots that were just hitting the board or even finishing fourth, that was important. So when Turf Day went out of business around 2011, I believe, I stopped playing the horses for a few years because the ratings were so valuable and pointing out winning angles. And so gradually I got back in. The only factor that I could not replace from Turf Day was the jockey factor. I'm able to cobble together sire information by Tomlinson figures, looking at winning percentages, or looking through the bloodstock produce records, so I can get a sense of sires. Traders' stats are in the form, and so you have the return on investment. It's not great, but you have some indication of trainers. But jockey, there's really nothing. And again, you can get ROI on jockeys if you take the extra step. But that's not even in the form though. So anyway, I started making my own jockey values based on what I thought Turf Day was doing, and basically it's just a formula that takes into consideration the odds of a horse and its finish position and field size. And I'm not sure how accurate they are, how precise they are, but after many years, I know that it gives me a lot of helpful information about which jockeys are moving the horse up, which jockeys are providing extra value on your selection. So generally, I have to still like a horse to bet it. But if a jockey value is high for my system, it tells me that I'm more likely to get value with that horse. And some jockeys, it's going to be a tax. Like, for example, the last year or two, betting Irad Ortiz on turf going long, it's basically, even though he's a good rider on turf, I'm sure, the public overvalues him in those races. So you're actually paying for, they have Irad Ortiz, Julian Leperoux, almost any long turf race, you're paying a tax for that. I think it's actually a French name, and people just assume because he's French, he's going to be better on turf.
Yeah, I saw a lot of that when I was playing full time in Vegas back in the 1990s. People would come up with these memes for jockeys, and one of them was Samine on the green, and it's like any French name is on the turf, play him.
Yeah, or Jean Cruget was the same thing. They always played him on the turf. I'm not sure. I never even saw the stats whether that was even true.
Yeah.
But just because you happen to be born in France doesn't necessarily make you going to be a better rider on turf. Now, obviously, you pay more experience, but I'm sure there's other factors that go into what makes a jockey talented and their riding styles.
Yeah, and I think Leperoux grew up mostly in Southern California. His family moved there at some point, but so you can be misled sometimes by that. But yeah, the high finishes at long odds, that's something that I keep an eye on, but I've never broken it down into specifics like sprints, routes, dirt, grass, just kind of more of a general feeling. And at Woodbine a few years ago, two jockeys from Japan came over and started riding full time. And Kimura, I forget his first name, sorry, was a guy who was bringing in long shots at second and third. And I was like, wow, this guy must be able to ride because he was doing it consistently. And sure enough, like now he's riding for Cassie, he's Mark Cassie and other leading trainers, both at Woodbine. He's at Gulfstream now, some pop up there for the first time. But your point is if you're paying attention, you can find these guys early on before most bettors do. And that's where the prices are. Luis Saez, when he first came to Gulfstream, I noticed he was only winning at 12 to 14%, but he had a positive ROI over all of his mounts. But now you can't. I mean, he's an even better jockey, but he's a worse bet if you were to just play him, every mount.
Well, I also think you don't have to categorize them by sprints, routes, turf, dirt, because I think you could just do jockeys and their value. I think that would be very helpful. But if you choose to break it down, it could have utility. And here's why. Generally, jockeys are bet based on Irad Ortiz, Paco Lopez, or their names, how good they are, and probably the value they provide to some degree as well. But the reality is they have different strengths and weaknesses. So you might be losing an opportunity. To give you an example, Jose Ortiz is a good rider on turf all year long, but he excels on the sprawling Belmont turf course. He knows how to time his move really well. I don't think it's because he's not good at the other turf courses, but I think they bet Jose Ortiz like he's on any turf ride, and he's particularly effective at Belmont. Another example is Paco Lopez. Paco Lopez is generally bet, and I think he's beginning to be seen as a turf specialist. But any long race, a long turf race, you bet Paco, you're probably adding value to your selection. I'm not sure if that's going to apply right now to Monmouth, because at Monmouth, it's so apparent that he's the best turf rider there that I think sometimes maybe it's already baked in. But and also you're also doing two things with evaluating the jockey. You're evaluating how good they are, but you're more important, you're evaluating the public's perception of them compared to how good they are, which is important because if let's say Miguel Vasquez at Gulfstream is riding the 2-turn dirt race or even a 1-turn mile dirt race, and Irad Ortiz is riding the same race, Miguel is just as good, Irad, on dirt, not on turf, but on dirt, he's just as good. But they're going to bet the horse more when Irad's riding it. So a horse that you might like, he may be bettable because Miguel's on him, but you may not like the price as much if Irad's riding him.
Yeah, that's you definitely see that a lot where a particular jockey gets overbet, and it would be helpful to know whether he's being overbet on a strength or on a weakness for sure. So it sounds like I've tried to work in jockey mechanics a little bit in evaluating jockeys, although I've never ridden a horse and I don't know a lot about it. There are certain riders of the past, like Pat Day, Lafitte Pinkai, who I used to try to watch closely. And I noticed like during stretch battles, that those guys, they moved in sync with the horse. There wasn't a lot of bouncing around. There wasn't excessive use of the whip. That to me, that seemed like a superior skill level to a lot of jockeys. So I look for that, and I've seen it, at some small tracks with jockeys who never made the big time, but they seem to have that sense of how to work with the horse. But it sounds like do you pay much attention to mechanics, or are you kind of looking more at the, I guess, the financial aspect of the how well they're doing compared to odds? And
I can recognize the mechanics of the effect of jockeys, but I think it's better to actually have data, because what happens is sometimes there are just biases, and you just get brought along with everybody else's biases. If you have data, you actually have verification of what you're seeing. But like, for example, I would consider myself a position handicapper, which Joe Colville was. I don't focus on that as much as I used to, but I try to bet horses that are getting better position today than they would last, in better post, or maybe they have the outside post. They have an outside post with the 2 speed horses in front of them. They should get a good tracking trip. Or I do a lot of that. So you do learn which jockeys know how to take advantage of position the best, which jockeys know how to take advantage of biases the best. Some jockeys, if the rail is dead, they're always on a dead rail. Like they just don't, maybe they don't believe in it or whatever. Other jockeys are the first to know that. Like there used to be a jockey named Josiah Hampshire, I believe. Hampshire?
Josiah Hampshire, yeah.
The guy always knew where the biased part of the track was, always in the biased part of the track. If you ever hear Frankie Dettori talk, he's always talking about the more firm ground. He's always looking for that. Some jockeys are doing that. So I'm more likely to put more stock into position, but I do recognize that the jockeys that seem to have good hands, the ones I know how to keep them, keep a horse in cover and try to tease him and move them out. And the horse is almost excited about running. I do notice those things, but I try to rely on data more because sometimes it's easy to get swept up in the biases that everyone else. The racetrack is filled with what's not common knowledge. What's it called? The usual knowledge. The phrase I'm looking for with
common sense.
Not common sense, but everyone believes it, so it's true. You hear stuff all the time that everyone just believes, and we never even kick the tires as to whether something is particularly true. And I always try to, like, for example, John Velasquez. He's basically seen as one of the best riders in the country. He's Hall of Fame, big mounts. I've never seen any kind of data that John Velasquez is anything extremely special on horses. Obviously, I've seen him ride really nicely. He's had good meets when I kept data, and he's actually done well. But there's no data that verifies how great he really is. But everyone just believes that he's a great rider. He seems like a nice guy, gives a good interview. So I spend most of my time betting against him. It's nothing personal. I never met him, but there's no data that actually verifies how great everyone says he is.
Yeah, I always wondered that too, because he spent a great part of his career as a dedicated rider to Todd Pletcher. And so talk about a jockey that had prime mounts most of the time. He certainly benefited from that. That could be, if I can interrupt, that could be because Velasquez tends to ride wide and stays out of trouble. And I think maybe Pletcher just feels like his horses are much the best. And I just want a guy who keeps my horses clear and not a guy like who's going to save ground and get into some trouble sometime because they're going to save ground and get in those pockets like Paco. Whereas John Velasquez, he's always like 3 wide and in the clear. Interesting. Yeah. I never, I kind of suspected he or had my doubts here and there about whether he was, his stats were from Pletcher, or, it's kind of like the Belichick versus Brady thing. Was Belichick great because Brady was great, or was Brady great because Belichick was a great coach? And I kind of always wondered that with the Velasquez Pletcher connection. But
by the way, it was conventional wisdom was the word I was looking for.
Conventional wisdom, yeah. So, I actually wrote an article for my old website. There was a stakes race, and I can't remember what it was, but Rosie Napravnik and Johnny B were on the top 2 horses in the race. And it was just, I'm not saying this was typical of Johnny B. I haven't studied him, but she outrode him. I'll try to dig that article up from the archives. But it was such a notable and I guess maybe somewhat unexpected outcome to see, this kind of young rider at the fairgrounds taking on the guy who's supposedly the best in the U.S. and she got the best of him. It was fun to watch.
Well, it was interesting because Velasquez rode for Baffert in the Preakness, I believe it was last year, and the race was just a mess. The horse he had won the Derby, I believe. I can't think of the horse's name, but Baffert ran another horse in that race, and they tried to do a boat race where Baffert sent one horse to the lead that was fast, and then he sent this horse. The horse Velasquez was riding right next to him. And the reason why Baffert was doing that, he figured if he had 2 speed horses in the race, it would discourage the other speed horses from even trying. It was kind of like running interference. He had done that to justifying the Belmont. And he got caught up in his own trap because the filly shot, it was Robbie Alvarado, shot the gap into the far turn and sent Velasquez wide. It was just so funny. A rider like Jerry Bailey or Gary Stevens, they would have just gone to the lead with confidence. They actually would have been judging how fast they were, judging pace. Velasquez already decided what he was going to do before he got into the gate. And that's why, to me, he's not in the same league as those other guys. But I'm sure he's a really good rider, but I just wouldn't put him in the league with those like elite riders.
That's interesting to, be able to pull something apart, look at it from a different perspective. So, I was thinking also there are times you talked about this a little, long-term stats. So the short-term stats can kind of alert you to someone coming up. I guess they could also alert you to a jockey who's declining, like Mike Smith in the last year or two. So you don't get caught up in the trap where if you've decided this is a great value rider or a great rider, and all of a sudden they're in a slump or in decline, the stats will show you that too.
It's interesting about Mike Smith. He'd been in decline before. I think in the late 90s or early 2000s, his career was almost over. And then he came back to the top of the game. But statistically, Mike Smith has always been amongst the best in dirt routes, amongst the best. I mean, off the charts in my values and also Turf Days values. Always average in dirt sprints, below average in turf, but just unbelievable in routes, which is interesting because with Zenyatta, he rode perfectly. He's rode perfectly with so many Baffert horses on the dirt. And, when you think about it, it's probably true. All his greatest successes have really been on the dirt and at long races. In terms of I haven't been doing values the last 6 months or so for California, but I had before, especially turf, and his turf values had, always near the bottom of the top 10 riders.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I want to mention again to viewers, the Facebook page Julian puts out is called The Handicapper's Insight. Lots of great content every day, something interesting up there. And before we go, I have to mention one thing. Julian posted something last week. It was a ride where the Ortiz brothers maybe helped each other out a little bit at Gulfstream. And it's a level of observation that really is really impressive. They were coming into the far turn. Irad, who is usually coming in on horses and being aggressive, floated a little bit wide, and coincidentally his brother came through the gap and won the race. And I have to say, honestly, I would have never noticed that, and I was really impressed that Julian put the video up and pointed that out. So good eye, Julian, on that one.
Can I explain how I noticed it though?
Oh, sure.
So I had played Irad in that race, and I had forgotten that I went back later and also played Jose. So he was a bigger price. So when I watched the race live, I'm just cheering for Irad. I didn't even know I had Jose. So he's in a perfect position. The pace had been quick, and there was 3 or 4 horses in the front that were getting ready to start stopping at various speeds. So if you have a closer, you want to get to the clear. Well, Irad is approaching these leaders, and he does a great job of leaving no space for anybody. He doesn't do that. Yeah. As a matter of fact, he gets criticized for playing the game a little bit too tight. So all of a sudden, Irad looks over. And, when you look over, usually that will make you move to your left a little bit and make sure there is no gap. Yeah. Instead, he looks over and actually moves to his right and opens up a gap. Now look, I used to be good friends with Steve Rushing, Irad's agent. So I don't want to offend Steve or offend the Ortiz brothers. And there might be a justification for it. If you watch closely on the turn, Irad's horse is on the wrong lead. Most horses, when they're cornering, they corner on their left lead. He's on his right lead. So there might be an explanation that he's on the wrong lead. He doesn't feel like he has total control of his horse. And Jose's coming, he's full of run, and he feels like he can't keep him in. But when you watch that replay, if you watch Irad, he rode a race earlier that day on the Tapeta that he won at 5-2. I forgot what horse, but he waited behind those the front runners till the last second before he went out, because he wanted to keep that very same thing from happening. So it's very much out of character for him to do that. But again, it's possible because this horse is on the wrong lead. He didn't feel as confident with him, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's still, no matter the explanation, it's still a great attention to detail on your part. So I guess we'll leave it at that. I want to thank you for being here. It's been, I've learned a few things, and that'll definitely deepen my understanding and evaluation of riders going forward. So thank you, Julian Brown of the Handicappers Insight.
Thank you. And can you say one thing? Besides me, there's also people like you, Mark Kramer. There's also other industry guys that post as well. So it's not just my point of view. It's open forum, and we do encourage open ideas. Again, we try to the conventional wisdom. That's not going to make us any money at the races. So we always like to hear alternative ideas.
Great. All right. That's it for today. Be sure to go to our website, lazybettorusa.com. We've got a lot of great Kentucky Derby content going up every week, as well as other interesting things. Thank you, Julian, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right.